January 1st, Slovakia. Gyorgy Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, goes to the Castle of Csejte to arrest one of the richest noble ladies of the time, and what he sees horrifies him. This is the story of Elizabeth Bathory, also known as the Blood Countess, who's been accused of torturing and killing nearly 600 women in her castle, along with the help of her servants, many of whom would later testify against her, but some believe it was all a ruse to get her huge estates and castles. Now, we're not normally a channel who explores or documents the lives of real people, but this biography is important because Elizabeth Bathory is also the ancient, apocalyptic, psychopathic villain of Castlevania Nocturne, the second season of which released on January 16, 2025. So let's quickly explore Erzsebet Bathory from the show before moving on to a detailed record of history's earliest female serial killer. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Erzsebet Bathory in Castlevania Nocturne. The Bathory from the show is an ancient apocalyptic psychopathic villain. She is so vile and violent that one could say she eclipses Dracula's triumphs, and that's saying something. She's even the self-declared vampire messiah, someone who's eager to reshape the world. Though the show adapts elements from the Castlevania games, it also pulls from real 17th century history. Bathory was a Hungarian noblewoman infamous for brutality so extreme it still horrifies scholars. Before Nocturne, the series presented Bathory in Castlevania Bloodlines from 1994. There, she aimed to resurrect her uncle Dracula by pretty much starting the First World War, which made her one of the biggest villains in the game. Bloodlines also introduced Drollta Twintes, who is based on Dortia Semtes, a real-life servant of the historical Bathory who was executed instead of her. In the show, Bathory claims to have drunk the blood of Sekhmet, the Egyptian goddess of war, thus gaining a near-divine ability to devastate humanity. So yeah, this time around, she's tied to ancient Egypt's mythos, where Sekhmet's bloodlust threatened to end civilization until the sun god Ra intervened with blood-red beer. By blending Egyptian lore with Bathory's European roots, Nocturne avoids creating a mere Dracula successor. It makes Bathory a terrifying villain, while enriching her backstory and making Castlevania Nocturne a worthy follow-up of the source material. With that established, let's cut to the chase and explore just who Elizabeth Bathory was in real life and if the stories around her are true. The life of Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory, remembered as the Blood Countess and said to have murdered 650 young women, was born on August 7, 1560 at her family estate in Nyírbátor, 146 miles from Budapest. Her mother was Baroness Anna Bathory of the Somlyó branch, and her father was Baron George VI Bathory of the Erzsebet branch. They were blood relatives. The Bathory name stretched back to 1310 and meant good hero, referring to a legend about a semi-mythical ancestor named Vetus who slew a dragon in the year 900. As his reward, Vetus received Erzsebet Castle and a coat of arms featuring 3 dragon teeth on a red and white shield. Elizabeth's father inherited Erzsebet Castle, which arose in the 1300s. She spent her childhood there, in the northern Great Plain region of eastern Hungary near the modern Romanian border. Raised as a Calvinist Protestant, she received a thorough education suitable for a noblewoman. She spoke Latin, German, Hungarian, and Greek, among a few other European languages. Needless to say, many consider her intelligent and strong-willed. She also suffered from seizures, likely tied to epilepsy, which ran in the Bathory family. People then viewed that condition through the lens of superstition, seeing it as a sign of madness or occult affliction. This was an era on the cusp of modernity, but still clinging to medieval traditions. Whipping and mutilation were common punishments for petty crimes, while suspected witches were often burned or drowned. Treason invited the worst tortures. A peasants' revolt in 1514 ended with its leader, Gyorgy Thurzo, dying in horrifying agony on a burning throne. Local lords decided punishments for lesser offenses, so Elizabeth grew up in a world where violent retribution was routine. Her family was powerful across 16th and 17th century Hungary and Poland. Her paternal uncle, Andrew Bonaventura Bathory, served as voivoda of Transylvania and Chief Justice of Hungary. Her maternal uncle, uncle, Stephen Bathory, married the Queen of Poland and became King Stefan Bathory in 1575. He also ruled as Grand Duke of Lithuania and Prince of Transylvania. Cousins Sigismund and Gabrielle Bathory held princely titles in Transylvania. Elizabeth thus inhabited a sphere that balanced her Protestant faith against the might of the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire. She was expected to display refined feminine virtues, yet she saw the grisly reality of medieval justice. In fact, the Bathory family owned land in the Kingdom of Hungary, which covered areas now in Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania. They were so wealthy that they lent money to many influential families, including the Habsburgs of Austria. The Habsburgs were one of the most powerful royal houses in medieval and early modern Europe, ruling from 1282 to 1918, a span of 636 years. Their core lands lay in East Central Europe, with Vienna as the capital. From 1583 to 1611, they shifted their seat to Prague. They produced kings of Hungary, Croatia, Bohemia, Galatia, Lodomeria, Spain, and Portugal, and they later claimed principalities in Italy and the Low Countries. They also held the imperial crowns of Austria and Austria-Hungary in the 19th century, and one family member even reigned in Mexico. The Habsburgs expanded their dominion throughout warfare and strategic marriages. That policy split the dynasty into branches in the mid-16th century, most famously the Spanish and Austrian lines. Intermarriage shrank their gene pool and led to serious disabilities, including the enlarged Habsburg jaw. They reached the height of their influence in the late 1500s, when they controlled the Holy Roman Emperor's throne from 1438 to 1806, except for a brief gap from 1740 to 1745. Though the Holy Roman Emperor was technically elected by prince-electors, the Habsburgs owned large portions of the empire, which gave them an advantage. Their territories spanned modern Germany, Austria, Czechia, Switzerland, the Low Countries, Slovenia, parts of eastern France, northern Italy, western Poland, and northern Croatia. They viewed themselves as heirs to imperial Rome and forcefully promoted Roman Catholicism. Ironically, it was within their lands that Protestantism emerged when Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses in Wittenberg in 1517. Hungary, in East Central Europe, had to contend with both the Habsburgs to the west and the Ottoman Turks to the east. This pressure shaped the fortunes of its nobility. The kingdom suffered repeated disruptions by these formidable neighbors. External conflicts in the 16th century spilled into Hungary's domestic affairs, affecting Elizabeth Bathory's own life. In 1490, Hungarian King Matthias Corvinus died. Known as Matthias the Just, he was a Renaissance monarch who raised the famed Black Army to bolster Hungary's defenses. His death halted progress in a time of mounting tension. The next kings were chosen by a diet of leading nobles who preferred a ruler weak enough to be controlled. This created an opening for the Ottoman Turks. In 1526, Suleiman the Magnificent overran part of Hungary at Mohacs, burned Buda, and killed King Ulaslo II in battle. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 had already destabilized the Balkans, and Hungary now found itself squeezed between the resurgent Turks and the powerful Habsburg Empire. Coming of age. Elizabeth Bathory came of age during a time when two rival claimants fought for Hungary's throne. Archduke Ferdinand I, later Holy Roman Emperor, hoped to place Hungary under Habsburg authority. János Zápolya, voivoda of Transylvania, commanded Hungary's remaining army and held a strong claim of his own. Ferdinand's family ties were formidable. He was brother-in-law to the late king and brother to Emperor Charles V. Yet Hungary's nobility stood divided. The Bathory clan itself split along two lines. The Somlyo branch, linked to Elizabeth's mother, supported János. The Eszed branch, Elizabeth's father's side, initially backed Ferdinand in exchange for help against the Turks, who had plagued Hungary for over a century. George Bathory, Elizabeth's father, then shifted allegiance to János, perhaps to align with her mother Anna's influential brother Stephen. The Habsburgs punished George by seizing his castle at Buja. This retaliation did not stop George from marrying Anna and uniting the two branches of the Bathory family tree under János's banner. Habsburg's resentment towards the Bathory name would last for many years. János ruled a Hungary torn by peasant uprisings, the fall of Buda to Ferdinand, and a doomed treaty with the Ottoman Turks. He died in 1541. Hungary was carved into three parts: Habsburg's Royal Hungary in the west, Ottoman Hungary in the center and south, and the Principality of Transylvania in the east. Elizabeth was born in Transylvania, which elected Hungarian princes who served as as vassals of either the Turks or the Habsburgs. Her life felt the impact of this constant strife, shaped by the Habsburgs' reach and the Ottoman threat. Transylvania, where the Bathory family thrived, enjoyed surprising prosperity despite the turmoil. The princes ruled under a construction that recognized three historic nations: Hungarians, Saxons, and Zeklers. Despite its position between Muslim Ottomans and Catholic Habsburgs, Transylvania promoted tolerance. Many nobles there were Calvinists, although Elizabeth's uncle, Prince Stephen Bathory, was Roman Catholic. The Edict of Torda in 1568 gave legal protection to 4 Christian denominations, excluding the Orthodox faith. It was the first law in Christian Europe to grant such freedoms. The Bathorys rose to full power in 1571, when Stephen Bathory became voivoda and later prince under both Ottoman and Habsburg suzerainty. Transylvania became semi-independent, governing its own affairs, while foreign policy lay in the hands of powerful neighbors. Another Bathory, Sigismund, served several terms as prince between 1586 and 1602. He led Transylvania into the long Turkish War that lasted from 1593 to 1606. Transylvania joined a Christian alliance against the Turks, yet the region faced a four-sided struggle involving Habsburgs, Ottomans, and Wallachia. After 1601, Habsburg Emperor Rudolf I briefly took control of Transylvania, attempted to Germanize its people, and pushed for Catholic renewal. A rebellion led by Stephen Bocskai soon reclaimed Transylvanian autonomy. Tensions with the Habsburgs continued, and power in Transylvania remained precarious. Elizabeth Bathory was engaged at 10 to Count Ferenc II Nadasdy. She moved to Castle Sarvar in western Hungary to live with his family, as custom dictated. A rumor later emerged that, while still young, she bore a child with a man of lower birth. Ferenc allegedly had this man castrated and thrown to savage dogs, then ordered the child killed or hidden away. Yet this story remains doubtful, partly because letters from that time praised Elizabeth's chastity. They officially married on May 8, 1575, at the Palace of Vranov nad Toplo, now in eastern Slovakia. This marriage unified two powerful families, the Bathorys and the Nadasdy. Elizabeth kept her own noble name, Bathory de Csejte, reflecting her family's status. She and Ferenc had multiple children, though only 3, Anna, Catalin, and Paul, survived to adulthood. Elizabeth delegated child-rearing to a governess, a normal practice for aristocrats of that era. While Ferenc fought in the Ottoman-Habsburg Wars, Elizabeth managed vast estates, including Sarvar. Documents show that she excelled at handling her husband's business interests and her own lands. She defended properties on the road to Vienna, an important Habsburg city. She also provided medical aid to local people and supported destitute women whose husbands died in battle. Surviving letters, often used to lodge complaints or report wrongdoing, do not mention any mistreatment of her subjects during this period. This absence suggests that few grievances, if any, arose. Learning the craft from her husband. Meanwhile, Ferenc gained fame and infamy on the battlefield. He led Hungarian troops against the Ottomans, helped seize Ottoman-held fortresses, and displayed notable bravery. His cruelty towards captured Ottoman soldiers was extreme. Witnesses told stories of decapitated heads tossed around in grim mockery. Such abuses reflected the brutal standards of warfare at that time, especially against non-Christians. When Ferenc returned home, rumors claimed he shared his torment methods with Elizabeth. One tale said he showed her how to coat a girl in honey and leave her to ants, or slip lit oiled paper between her toes. These stories made Elizabeth seem eager to adopt her husband's sadistic practices. However, most of the horrors tied to her name took place after Ferenc's death. He died before facing any repercussions for his alleged acts. Elizabeth's position as a powerful noblewoman shielded her from scrutiny during Ferenc's life. She controlled finances, properties, and a network of servants. No direct evidence exists of severe abuses during this stage, but legends point to a gradual escalation. The real turning point would come after Ferenc's passing, when Elizabeth stood alone at the helm of her estate. Accusations of torture and mass murder would soon follow, marking her as the infamous Blood Countess. Elizabeth Bathory's harsh treatment of servants was not shocking for her time. Noble overlords often relied on violence to enforce order. Legally, they could kill a peasant with little consequence beyond a fine to compensate the victim's family. Rumors said Elizabeth once struck a servant for pulling her hair while brushing it. Further tales described her delight in brutality, including a black claw she supposedly strapped to her hand to rake her victim's skin. She allegedly shoved needles under the nails of young servant girls and broke one girl's arm for clumsy work. Some people claimed Elizabeth's family taught her about Satanism and witchcraft, but she was never charged with these crimes. Authorities pursued her for torture and murder instead. Many blamed Anna Darvulia, who became Elizabeth's confidant in 1601. Servants later stated that Darvulia introduced Elizabeth to more vicious methods and guided other helpers in carrying out acts of cruelty. Witnesses said the Countess grew more violent after Darvulia arrived, becoming the head of the caste and estates. By the early 1600s, as Count Ferenc II Nadasdy's health declined, Elizabeth invited girls from the lesser gentry to join her gymnasium. This woman's quarters offered training in etiquette, dance, household management, and language skills. Elizabeth, fluent in at least 4 languages, seemed an ideal mentor. Suspicion arose when many of these girls died or vanished. Elizabeth blamed cholera, but the number of burials climbed. Priests were called often to conduct funerals. Reports of starvation and unexplained injuries spread in the area. Elizabeth's husband shielded her from serious scrutiny. He died on January 4, 1604, after a long period of leg pain that left him disabled the previous year. His exact cause of death remains unclear. Once he was gone, Elizabeth stood alone, and the growing complaints about dead noble daughters were harder to dismiss. The law paid little attention to the fate of peasants, but noble bloodshed drew alarm. Had let her act without fear, but the deaths of young gentry could not be ignored. She faced accusations of gleeful savagery, with stories claiming she tortured victims behind closed doors. Some observers believed she was testing bizarre devices designed to inflict agony. Others asserted she practiced black magic. Officials focused on the evidence of murder, not sorcery. The toll of fatalities at Elizabeth's castles kept rising, and the final straw was her involvement with the daughters of respectable families. While everyday brutality remained widespread in Hungary, the scale and audacity of her alleged crimes were unprecedented. Her downfall illustrates the limits of aristocratic immunity when influential families demanded answers and justice. Elizabeth's life, once secured by her husband's military fame and her own noble birth, began to unravel under the weight of horrifying rumors and the mounting dead. So, what was next for her? Elizabeth Bathory's later years were bound to the powerful Hungarian magnate Gyorgy Thurzo, Palatine of Hungary from 1609 to 1616. He oversaw her and her children after Count Ferenc II Nadasdy's death, but he would also orchestrate her undoing. Elizabeth managed the family wealth because her son was still an infant, which made her a tempting target. In 1602, rumors of Elizabeth's brutality spread. Priests on her estates grew wary of the alleged cholera killing young women in her gymnasium. Elizabeth barred them from inspecting the bodies, allowing only a glance at the victims' faces. She had enjoyed Nadasdy's protection during his life, but in 1604, that shield vanished. Lutheran minister East von Marchiar then attacked her reputation at the Habsburg court, inflaming suspicions. By October 1610, Elizabeth fled to Csejte Castle in today's Slovakia. She counted on the harsh winter to block any attempt to arrest her. She also appealed to her cousin, Prince Gabriel Báthory of Transylvania, hoping to rally Báthory support if charges arose. That same year, King Matthias II, himself a Habsburg, authorized an official probe. He tasked Thurzo with investigating Elizabeth's alleged crimes. Notaries Andras Koresturi and Moses Cheraki secured 52 witness statements by October 1610 and over 300 by 1611. Was she really the Blood Countess? Historians have long debated whether Elizabeth was guilty or framed. 3 motives appear: money, power, and religion. Money posed a serious factor. Nadasdy had once lent a large sum to Matthias's predecessor, leaving the king with an unwelcome debt. Elizabeth repeatedly asked the court to repay it. Her arrest led to this debt's cancellation, suggesting a financial gain for Matthias. Power also mattered. The Habsburgs disliked the Bathory's sway in Transylvania Transylvania. Matthias II was brother to Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, and he hoped to unify Hungary under Habsburg's rule. Elizabeth and her cousins threatened those plans. Sigismund Bathory, one cousin, had rebelled in an effort to restore Transylvanian independence and was jailed for conspiracy in 1610. Elizabeth supported him. Another cousin, Gabriel Bathory, sought to expand his territory into royal Hungarian lands. Elizabeth promised him funds and troops. Religion formed the third issue. Elizabeth's family had both Catholics and Protestants, and conflicts with the staunchly Catholic Habsburgs added more friction. Yet the courts did not accuse her of witchcraft, only torture and murder. Thurzo, meanwhile, negotiated peace with Gabriel Bathory. Removing Elizabeth was a potent way to undermine her cousin's resources. Elizabeth's downfall thus had many layers. Hundreds of witnesses testified against her, but political maneuvering shaped every step. As a widow commanding vast Transylvanian estates, she was vulnerable. Her demands for repayment and her ties to rebellious relatives only inflamed Habsburg's wrath. The investigation ended with her arrest in late 1610. Her captivity resolved a royal debt, sidelined an influential family, and secured Habsburg's ambitions in the region. Elizabeth Bathory's family were Protestants at a time when Catholic and Protestant tensions climbed toward the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648. Ferdinand II, the future Holy Roman Emperor, planned to force Catholicism on his lands, including Transylvania, and this stirred anger among Protestants in Central and Eastern Europe. Although this religious conflict may have aggravated the strained ties between the Bathorys and the Catholic Habsburgs, Elizabeth's own relatives included Catholic figures, such as her uncle King Stefan Báthory of Poland. The first public accusations against Elizabeth came not from Catholics, but from the Lutheran minister István Marchiar, weakening the idea that religion alone drove her downfall. On December 30th, 1610, Gyorgy Thurzo led a decisive move against Elizabeth. Acting on a formal investigation authorized by King Matthias II, he arrested her and 5 servants at Csejte Castle for a series of murders stretching from 1590 to 1610. Later accounts claimed Elizabeth was caught torturing a girl, but in truth, she was taken into custody while dining with guests. The farce of a trial. Thurzo's letters to his wife boasted of finding living victims and a dead body, but no physical proof was presented at her trial. This alleged scene, intended to shock the local population, may have been staged, as no solid evidence surfaced. Some argue that Thurzo, who served as Palatine and guardian of Elizabeth's children, had much to gain from her arrest. He could claim her vast estates and wealth, and he could further his political ambitions by removing a prominent Bathory ally from the complex Transylvanian stage. By January 1611, the case went to trial. Most testimonies were secondhand and fed by rumor. Witnesses spoke of young women aged 10 to 14 from the lesser gentry who had joined Elizabeth's gymnasium and never returned home. Certain witnesses mentioned seeing signs of torture, but no physical exhibits were brought before the court. Of 3 first-hand testimonies, 2 came from court officials, Benedict de Seo and Jacob Zilvasi, who swore they saw Elizabeth commit murder. Their claims lacked corroboration or physical proof. The third came from a girl named Anna, who said Elizabeth injured her arm. Yet Anna altered her story more than once and soon received gold, wheat, and land in Csejte. These rewards, along with her shifting details, cast doubt on her account. The trial highlighted a claim of 650 victims, but this figure relied on the statement of a single servant girl, Susanna, who mentioned a private ledger witnessed by Zilvasi. He never confirmed its existence. 50 to 60 victims was a more frequent total given during the proceedings. Elizabeth's servants, including Ilona Yo and Dortia Sintesh, confessed under torture, with red-hot pincers used to tear out their fingers. They were then burned alive. Another servant, János Uzsváry, received a quicker execution, while an elderly washerwoman named Katarina Benichka was given a life sentence. A suspected witch, Ertsi Majorva, was also burned. Anna Darvulia died before any arrest, but others claimed under duress that she had taught Elizabeth sinister practices. Because the evidence depended on hearsay, forced confessions, and missing records, the truth truth of Elizabeth's guilt remains uncertain. Elizabeth Bathory's servants first blamed one another for the brutalities, then turned on her under torture. She tried to clear her name by persuading the mother of a deceased gymnasium pupil to say her daughter had died naturally. When no one believed her tale of cholera, she claimed one girl had killed the others. Then she insisted that her servants alone were guilty, saying she feared their sadism. Rumors, however, spread like wildfire. Allegations described hot tongs, needles, and icy water used on young women. Some witnesses say Elizabeth bit away pieces of flesh and bathed in her victim's blood, hoping to stay youthful. Rumors grew of a whole network aiding her crimes. Noblewomen such as Lady Anna Veliker, Lady Judith Pogon, and Lady Schell were accused of recruiting new victims when Elizabeth ran out of local servants. Even her youngest daughter Catelyn was rumored to have joined a torture session at Csejte Castle, where Elizabeth supposedly kept a dungeon. Despite these stories, only Elizabeth's servants went on trial. She, a noblewoman, never faced a judge in court. Two proceedings took place in January 1611 to deal with her accomplices, yet she was barred from defending herself. Meanwhile, her son Paul and two sons-in-law negotiated with Gyorgy Thurzo to prevent the crown from seizing Bathory property. At first, they planned to send her to a convent, but public outrage forced a stricter punishment. King Matthias II wanted a formal trial to claim her estates, but Thurzo convinced him that house arrest was wiser, warning that putting a high-ranking Hungarian noblewoman to death would set a dire precedent. Matthias agreed, provided the enormous royal debt owed to Elizabeth's family was cancelled, which Paul arranged. The precise details of her confinement remain uncertain. Some claimed she was walled into a room with only small openings for food. Others said she had some freedom within the castle. Either way, she reportedly lived in comfort with attendants. On August 21st, 1614, at age 54, she died still under house arrest at Csejte Castle. She had never been found guilty in a court of law, so her children inherited her wealth and lands. The main penalty the Bathory family suffered was losing the huge sum owed by the king. Villagers at Csejte refused to share their cemetery with an alleged mass murderer, prompting the removal of her body. Many believe she was laid to rest in the Bathory crypt at her childhood home of Csejte Castle or at Nyírbátor, where she was born. Others say she was reburied in secret at Csejte Castle. In 1938, a possible grave in the castle's church proved empty. The final resting place of the so-called Blood Countess remains unknown. So too does the truth of her guilt, hidden behind forced confessions, missing evidence, and the swirling conflict of politics, power, and religion that shaped her fate. Marvelous verdict. Not all that's been said about Bathory is true. Elizabeth Bathory's story is clouded by myths that grew long after her death. The earliest accounts were written more than a century later, and most first-hand evidence came from Gyorgy Thurzo's reports. This confusion grew worse when rumors of blood-bathing and vampirism spread. The notion that Elizabeth bathed in her victim's blood first appeared in 1729 in Tragica Historia by Jesuit scholar Laszlo Töröcsy. Hungarian historian Matthias Bell echoed Töröcsy's tale in 1742. By 1817, when some trial notes were published, the idea of Elizabeth as a supernatural monster had stuck. Her legend soon mingled with Europe's early 18th century vampire scares. Famine, plague, and social crises fueled superstitions. Governments even investigated claimed vampire outbreaks. Intellectuals wrote serious analyses. Though the Age of Reason was underway, old fears of the undead still held sway. This cultural backdrop contributed to stories of Elizabeth as a demonic countess who feasted on blood. Her alleged cruelty and Transylvanian heritage made her an ideal symbol of vampire legend. Some have said that she inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula, though Stoker's own notes never mention her. Yet the labels Blood Countess and Countess Dracula persist. Modern retellings focus on her savage image. Films often portray her as a blood-starved vampiress. Guinness World Records once named her the most prolific female murderer. The sexual overtones and gruesome details overshadow her known achievements. She had once supported war widows, managed vast estates, and educated young noblewomen. That side of her story was lost beneath tales of torture chambers and ritualistic homicide. Historians remain divided. No physical evidence of murder or torture appeared at her trials. She never testified in court. Most testimonies came through hearsay, and the entire inquiry was led led by men with too much to gain. King Matthias II, who aimed to clear royal debts and tighten his grip on Transylvania, and Palatine Thurzo, who wanted her well. Both had reason to see her convicted. Yet the deaths of many young women around Elizabeth cast doubt on the idea that her guilt was entirely fabricated. The figure 650, drawn from one servant's unverified claim, seems extreme. A more likely number of victims, around 50, was mentioned more frequently in trial records. That would still make her a prolific killer, though not the monstrous caricature later accounts depict. Her Protestant faith may have heightened tensions with the Catholic Habsburgs, but these charges first arose from a Lutheran minister, not a Catholic plot. Gender played a role too. Many could not accept that an ordinary woman might inflict such atrocities. They preferred to see her as a supernatural creature or a mad aristocrat. Yet Elizabeth lived in an era of conspiracies, brutal warfare, and widespread superstitions. Her story illustrates how rumor, fear, and politics can combine to create a legend. The truth remains murky. She was likely cruel, perhaps murderous, but the vampire fantasies and impossible death tolls say as much about the age that shaped her legacy as they do about Elizabeth herself. This was the story of Elizabeth Bathory, but I'd like to know from you what your opinion of the lady is. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.